For an entire year, I held my dying mother-in-law's hand, telling her that her son, my husband, was away on critical business, when in reality, he was on a world tour with his mistress. Hi everyone. Some of you know me as Grandma Eleanor from our little community here. My full name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 80 years old, and I'm speaking to you from my quiet little home in Maple Creek, the same home I've lived in for almost 60 years. This is a story I've kept locked in the deepest chamber of my heart for over 30 years. Not a single soul knows the full truth. Not my dearest friends, not even my own 2 children. The shame, you see, gosh, the shame was a heavy cloak I wore every single day, and the silence was its thread. I thought I would take this secret to my grave, let it turn to dust with me. But I've come to realize that some stories aren't just ours to carry. They need to be set free, if only to help someone else unburden themselves of their own. Even my own children don't know about this, about the true nature of their father and the final year of their grandmother's life. To them, the story is much simpler, much kinder. But today, I'm going to tell you the real story. The whole, unvarnished, painful truth. Before I begin, I have a small favor to ask. It feels a bit silly, at my age, asking for such things, but it matters. Please, if you would, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every time I see that little number go up, it feels like a warm hand on my back, a quiet whisper telling me I'm not alone. Your support gives me the strength to finally share what I've kept hidden for so long, to open a door that has been bolted shut for more than half my life. Thank you. Truly, my story, the real story, began in the summer of 1985. But to understand the fall, you must first understand the heights from which I fell. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the love that came before it. A love so grand, so seemingly perfect, that I thought it was forged in the stars themselves. It all started, as most of my cherished memories do, with Robert. My Robert. We met in 1962, just after I'd finished my nursing training. He was charming, with a smile that could coax the sun from behind the clouds and eyes the color of the summer sky. He was a young architect, full of dreams of building beautiful things, and from the moment he first took my hand at a local dance, I felt like I was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Our courtship was something out of a storybook. Back then, you know, things were different. Slower, more deliberate. He would write me letters, even though we only lived 2 towns apart. He'd send them to the hospital where I worked, and the other nurses would sigh with envy when the postman delivered another one of his envelopes, always sealed with a little wax stamp bearing his initial. Arr! His words were poetry. He didn't just say he loved me, he described it. He said my laughter was like wind chimes on a spring morning, and that my presence made any room feel like home. Was it any wonder I fell so deeply? We married in the autumn of 1964. I remember the crunch of golden leaves under my feet as I walked towards him down the aisle. He had tears in his eyes. He whispered to me at the altar, "Today, my life truly begins." And for more than 20 years, I believed that was true for both of us. We built our forever home here in Maple Creek, board by board, dream by dream. Robert designed it himself, of course. He'd stay up late into the night, hunched over his drafting table, sketching out every detail. He'd ask her my opinion on everything. "Eleanor, my love," he'd say, holding up a blueprint, "should the kitchen window face the east, so we can have breakfast with the sunrise?" He wanted our life to be perfect, and for so long, it truly was. Our home was filled with the smell of my baking and the sound of his cheerful whistling. On weekends, we'd pack picnics and drive out to Miller's Pond, lying on a blanket for hours, just talking and dreaming about the future. And then the children came. First, our son, Michael, and 2 years later, our daughter, Sarah. Robert was a wonderful father. He was present, he was fun, he was everything a man was supposed to be. He taught Michael how to ride a bike, holding onto the seat with unwavering patience until he could finally pedal off on his own. He built Sarah the most magnificent dollhouse, a perfect miniature of our own home. From the outside, we were the picture of happiness. The Vances. The perfect family with the perfect life. To be honest, from the inside, it felt that way too. But the other great love story in Robert's life, the one that ran parallel to ours, was the one he had with his mother, Clara. Clara was not a stereotypical mother-in-law, the kind you read about in magazines, who criticizes your cooking and questions your parenting. Gosh, no. Clara was a jewel. She was a tiny woman with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a heart to match. She had raised Robert on her own, after her husband passed away, when Robert was just a boy, and their bond was something fierce and beautiful to behold. He adored her, and she, in turn, saw the sun, moon, and stars in her son. Every Sunday, without fail, Robert would call her at precisely 10 a.m. It was a ritual. I could be in the middle of telling him something, and he'd hold up a finger with a gentle smile and say, "One moment, my love. It's Mom o'clock." And I never minded. Not once. Because I loved Clara too. From the moment Robert introduced us, Clara welcomed me not as a daughter-in-law, but as the daughter she'd always wished for. She taught me how to perfect her legendary apple pie recipe, her hands guiding mine as we kneaded the dough. We'd spend hours in her sprawling garden, pulling weeds and talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell me stories about Robert as a little boy, how he was afraid of thunderstorms, and how he once tried to build a rocket to the moon in the backyard. She shared her son with me, completely and without reservation. "You're the best thing that ever happened to him, Eleanor," she told me once, her voice thick with sincerity, as we sat on her porch swing, sipping lemonade. "You settled the wildness in him. You gave him a home." Her approval felt like a blessing. Her love felt like a shield. In our perfect life, she was the beautiful, ornate frame around our family portrait. Robert, a devoted husband and father. And just as importantly, a devoted son. He was the man who fixed her leaky faucet, who mowed her lawn every second Saturday, who would sit with her for hours, just listening as she recounted the same old stories with the same infectious joy. He seemed so good, so kind, so utterly and completely decent. And that, you see, is the cruelest part of this story. The man who would go on to shatter my world into a million pieces wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was the man I loved more than life itself. He was the man who looked at me with adoration for 20 years. He was the doting son of a woman I considered my own mother. The betrayal didn't come from a stranger. It came from the very heart of my home. And it started so quietly. A little ripple in the calm, perfect ocean of our lives. A change so subtle that at first I didn't even notice it was happening. Or perhaps my heart simply refused to see. The year was 1985. Our children were nearly grown. Michael was in his second year of university, and Sarah was finishing her last year of high school, her head full of dreams of art school. The house was quieter, you know. The frantic energy of childhood had mellowed into the gentle hum of a life well lived. It was supposed to be our time. Robert's and mine. A time to rediscover each other after 2 decades of focusing on the kids. But that's not what happened. Instead, a chill began to settle into the corners of our home. A quietness that had nothing to do with an empty nest and everything to do with a growing distance. At first it was just work. Robert's firm had landed a massive, prestigious contract to design a new city arts complex. It was the biggest project of his career, the kind of thing he had dreamed of since he was a young man. He was ecstatic, and I, of course, was incredibly proud of him. But that pride soon became a companion to loneliness. The project demanded all of him. The late nights at his drafting table, once a shared space where I'd bring him coffee and we'd talk, became a fortress of solitude. He started coming home after I was already in bed, and leaving before the sun had a chance to kiss the kitchen window, robbing us of our sunrises. The man who came home to me was a stranger wearing my husband's face. The cheerful whistling that used to echo through the halls was gone, replaced by a heavy sigh at the doorway. His eyes, the color of the summer sky, were now perpetually clouded with exhaustion and something else. Something I couldn't name. A remoteness that felt like a pane of glass between us. Little by little, The small affections that had been the bedrock of our marriage began to erode. He stopped calling me my love. It was just Eleanor. He stopped noticing my new haircut or the dress I wore specifically for him. Our dinner conversations, once lively and full of shared stories about our day, dwindled into a tense silence, punctuated only by the clinking of our silverware. He'd often eat with the evening paper propped up in front of him, a wall of newsprint that felt as impenetrable as a castle gate. I tried, of course. I tried. "Is everything all right, Robert?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the cavernous silence. "You seem so far away." "I'm fine, Eleanor," he'd reply, his eyes never leaving the page. "Just tired. This project it's a beast. And I accepted it. What else could I do?" This was his dream. It was my duty, as his wife, I believed, to be supportive, to be his peace. So I'd swallow my feelings and simply busy myself with clearing the table, my heart sinking like a stone with every silent meal. My inner monologue became a torturous cycle of doubt and reassurance. Maybe I was just being paranoid? He's under immense pressure. It's not about me. Don't be selfish, Eleanor. I would scold myself constantly. I'd try harder. I'd make his favorite roast for dinner. I'd leave little encouraging notes in his briefcase. But my efforts were met with a distracted sort of gratitude that felt more wounding than no gratitude at all. His words felt like a pat on the head to a child, not the loving appreciation of a partner. Then came the first real crack in my carefully constructed denial. It was a Thursday. He had called to say he'd be home late, a celebratory dinner with the team for securing a crucial phase of the funding. I waited up for him as I always did, dozing off in the armchair in the living room. When he finally came in, well after midnight, he moved so quietly, as if hoping not to wake me. But I smelled it. A faint, sweet scent that was definitely not mine. It was a sophisticated perfume, something floral and expensive. It lingered in the air around him, a ghost of someone else's presence. A cold fear, sharp and immediate, crawled up my spine. My eyes snapped open. "Robert?" He jumped, startled. "Eleanor, I thought you were asleep." "How was the dinner?" I asked, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "It was fine. Long," he said, already unbuttoning his shirt, his back to me. "I'm exhausted. I'm heading straight up." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Robert, you smell different." He froze for a second. Just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. I saw the tension in his shoulders. He turned, his face carefully blank, but his eyes were cold. I was at a dinner with about 30 people, many of them women. Someone probably hugged me goodbye. "For God's sake, Eleanor, must you be so suspicious? Can I have one success without an interrogation?" His words were like a slap. Humiliation washed over me, hot and swift. He was right. I was being ridiculous, paranoid, suspicious. The loving husband I knew was still there, just buried under stress, and my nagging was only making it worse. "No, of course not," I whispered to his retreating back. "I'm sorry, I miss you." He didn't reply. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the scent of that phantom perfume mocking me. Was it really all my fault? Who could I even turn to? Telling a friend felt like a betrayal of our marriage. Telling my children was unthinkable. I was utterly alone in my growing fear. Just as this suffocating new reality began to feel permanent, our world was tilted on its axis by a phone call. It was a Tuesday morning. Robert had already left for work. The phone rang, and it was a nurse from the local hospital. It was about Clara. She had collapsed while gardening. She was conscious, but they were running tests. I rushed to the hospital, my own anxieties about my marriage evaporating in the face of a much more tangible fear. I found her in a small, sterile room, looking impossibly tiny and frail against the stark white sheets. Robert arrived soon after, his face a mask of panic. He ran to her bedside, grabbing her hand. Mom, I'm here." Clara, ever the stoic, gave a weak smile. "Oh, Robbie, Don't you fuss. I just overdid it with the roses. But we knew it was more than that. The doctor came in later that afternoon. His face was grim. He used words I will never forget. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced. Aggressive. The room fell silent, the only sound the steady, indifferent beep of the heart monitor. I watched as my husband, my strong, confident Robert, completely shattered. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, and he sobbed. Not quiet, dignified tears, but gut-wrenching, broken sobs. He looked up at me, his eyes wild with despair. This can't be happening, Eleanor. Not to her. Not to my mom. In that moment, all my suspicion and hurt melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated sympathy and love. This was the Robert I knew, the devoted son, the man with the enormous heart. How could I have ever doubted him? The perfume, the distance, the silence. It was all just stress, my own foolish paranoia. I went to him, wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders, and held him. We'll face it together, I whispered. Whatever she needs, whatever you need, I'm here. We will get through this. He clung to me, his tears soaking the shoulder of my blouse. I know, he cried. Thank you, Eleanor. I don't know what I'd do without you. We brought Clara home a week later. The prognosis was bleak. Perhaps a year, the doctor said. If we were lucky. We turned our downstairs guest room into a bedroom for her, so she wouldn't have to manage the stairs. I immediately switched to part-time at the hospital, arranging my nursing shifts so I could be with her for most of the day. It was decided, without question, that she would stay with us, that I would be her primary caretaker. It was my honor to do so. For Clara, who I loved like my own mother, and for Robert, my husband, who was in so much pain. I felt needed. I felt, for the first time in months, like the center of my family again. I was the pillar. I was Eleanor, the capable nurse, the loving wife, the devoted daughter-in-law. And that's when the second blow landed. 2 weeks after Clara moved in, Robert sat me down in the living room. His face was pale and drawn. Eleanor, he began, his voice heavy with a rehearsed gravity. We need to talk. Something has come up with work. It's the worst possible timing, I know. A cold dread began to seep back into my bones. The investors for the arts complex, they're an international consortium, he explained, avoiding my eyes. They've moved up the final planning phase. It requires a series of meetings, presentations. In Europe, Paris, Rome, Berlin. It's a world tour, essentially. And I have to lead it. I have to be there. I stared at him, dumbfounded. What? Now? Robert, your mother she's right down the hall. She's dying. And don't you think I know that? He snapped, his voice cracking with feigned anguish. Don't you think this is killing me? But this contract, it's worth millions, Eleanor. The penalties for backing out now would ruin us. The money from this will secure our future. It will pay for the best private care for Mom. The best treatments, anything she needs. He framed it as a sacrifice. A terrible, heartbreaking sacrifice he was making for us. For his mother. He painted a picture of himself, alone in foreign hotel rooms, working tirelessly for his family, while his heart was breaking at home. I looked at his face, saw the tears welling in his eyes. Tears I now know were not for his mother, but for himself. And I believed him. I had to. The alternative was too monstrous to even contemplate. How long? I whispered. I don't know, he said, shaking his head. A few months, maybe longer. The project is fluid, but I'll call every single day. I'll call her every day. The night before he left, he knelt by his mother's bedside. He held her hand, his face a perfect portrait of grief. I have to go, Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It's for work. It's unavoidable. But Eleanor will be here. She'll take care of you. And I'll be back before you know it. I love you so much. Bienvenue. Clara, frail and medicated, patted his hand. I know, Robbie. Be good. I love you. I stood in the doorway, my heart aching for both of them. I made a silent vow right then and there. I would be everything to Clara. I would fill the space Robert left behind. I would care for her, comfort her, and make her final months as peaceful and full of love as I possibly could. I would be his rock, his proxy, the keeper of his home and his family, until he returned from his noble, terrible duty. I hugged him at the airport the next day, clinging to him. Be safe, I said. You're a saint, Eleanor, he whispered into my hair. I love you. I watched his plane become a tiny silver speck in the vast blue sky, and I felt a profound sense of purpose. I had no idea that I wasn't a saint. I was a fool. And my husband wasn't flying toward his duty. He was flying toward her. The first few weeks after Robert left were a blur of exhaustion and duty. My life shrank to the four walls of our home, or more accurately, to the confines of Clara's sick room. The vibrant, sun-filled house Robert had designed for our happiness became a quiet, solemn hospital. The air, once filled with the scent of my baking, now carried the sterile, medicinal smell of rubbing alcohol and sickness. My world became a relentless cycle of schedules and needs. 6 a.m. First dose of pain medication. 7 a.m. Helping Clara with her morning wash. 8 a.m. Trying to coax a few spoonfuls of broth past her lips. And on it went, a metronome of suffering, marking time until the next dose, the next task, the next sleepless night. The nights were the hardest. Clara's pain was a living thing in the darkness. Sometimes she'd cry out, not from a nightmare, but from the fire consuming her from within. Other times she'd be lucid and terrified, her small hand gripping mine with surprising strength. I'm scared, Eleanor, she'd whisper, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. I don't want to die. And what could I say? I'd sit by her bed for hours, humming the old lullabies she once sang to Robert, stroking her forehead and lying. I became a master of lies. I lied about the pain getting better. I lied about how much time she had left. But the biggest and most constant lie was about Robert. His phone calls were, for a short while, the one bright spot in my suffocating routine. The first week, he called 3 times a day. He sounded exactly as I had expected, stressed, heartbroken, and desperate for news. How is she, Eleanor? Tell me everything. Did she eat? Is she in pain? Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm thinking of her every single second. And I would. I would hold the phone to Clara's ear, and he would speak to her, his voice choked with what I thought was genuine emotion. After he hung up, a little bit of light would return to Clara's eyes. My Robbie, she'd say, a faint smile on her lips. He's such a good boy, working so hard for his family. A cold knot of guilt would tighten in my stomach. I was her caregiver, her nurse, but I was also an accomplice in a fiction, propping up the image of the devoted son who was thousands of miles away. It felt wrong, but what was the alternative? To tell a dying woman her beloved son wasn't the man she thought he was? Who could I even turn to? The burden was mine alone. Then the postcards started arriving. The first one was from Paris, a glossy picture of the Eiffel Tower sparkling at night. I remember my hands trembling as I took it from the postman. On the back, in Robert's familiar, slanted script, it read, Dearest Mom and Eleanor, Paris is beautiful, but all I can think about is being home. The meetings are grueling. Counting the days. All my love, Robert. Naani, Anasio. I read it aloud to Clara, my voice bright and cheerful, faking an enthusiasm I did not feel. His words felt thin, generic, like something a stranger would write. Not my Robert, the man who used to write me pages of poetry. Clara, however, was delighted. She had me pin it to the corkboard by her bed, the first of what would become a colorful, heartbreaking collection of lies. As the weeks bled into a month, then 2, things began to change. Robert's calls became less frequent. 3 times a day became once a day, always late at night for me, which was midday for him in Europe. His questions about his mother became rote, a checklist he seemed to be running through out of obligation rather than concern. "How's Mom?" "Good. Did she eat?" "Okay. Pain level?" He'd ask, but I could hear the distraction in his voice. I could hear the click of a lighter, the clink of a glass. He wasn't really listening. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day where Clara had been confused and weeping, calling out for Robert for hours, the phone finally rang. I was emotionally and physically drained, my bones aching with a weariness that sleep couldn't fix. "Hi, Eleanor," he said. He sounded bright, too bright. There was an energy in his voice that didn't match the somber, hard-working man he was pretending to be. "Robert," I said, my voice flat with exhaustion. "It was a bad day. Your mother, she was asking for you." "Oh, gosh, that's awful. I'm so sorry to hear that," he said, but his sympathy felt hollow, a pre-recorded message. Before I could say more, I heard it. Faintly, in the background. Laughter, darn. Not just any laughter. A woman's laughter. High-pitched and carefree. My blood ran cold. It was a visceral, instant reaction. My entire body went rigid. "Robert, where are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a slight pause. "I'm in the hotel lobby grabbing a coffee before the next session. It's noisy in here." His answer was too quick, too smooth. It sounded like someone was laughing. I pushed, my heart hammering against my ribs. His tone shifted. It became sharp, defensive. The same tone he'd used when I'd asked about the perfume. "Eleanor, it's a hotel lobby. People laugh. What is wrong with you? Do you think I'm over here having a party? My mother is dying, and I'm working myself to the bone to pay for her care. And all you can do is interrogate me." Dean. The familiar shame washed over me again, but this time it was followed by a flicker of anger. He was twisting it, turning my valid question into an attack on his character, on his devotion as a son. He was making me the villain. "I'm sorry," I muttered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm just tired." "We're all tired, Eleanor," he said, his voice cold. "I have to go. Kiss Mom for me." And he hung up. I stood there in the silent hallway, the receiver still pressed to my ear, the dial tone buzzing like an angry hornet. I was frozen with fear. The image of him, sitting in a beautiful European cafe, a woman with a high-pitched laugh beside him, flashed in my mind. It was so vivid, so horribly clear. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the thought. "No, you're exhausted. You're grieving. Your mind is playing tricks on you. He's your Robert. He would never." A few days later, a new postcard arrived. This one was from Rome. A picture of the sun-drenched Colosseum. The message was even more brief. "Incredible history here. The work continues. Hope you are both well. Love, R." Love, R, not even his full name. As I pinned it next to the Eiffel Tower, I felt a profound and terrifying shift inside me. I was no longer just a tired, grieving wife. I was a woman with a secret, a terrible suspicion that was beginning to solidify in my gut like a block of ice. I looked at the colorful postcard, so cheerful and bright, and then at Clara, sleeping fitfully in her dimly lit room, her breath a shallow whisper. The contrast was a physical pain. My husband was on the grand tour, sending back cheap sentiments on cardboard, while his mother was on her final, agonizing journey, with only me to hold her hand. And for the first time, a truly terrifying question echoed in the silent corners of my heart. What if he wasn't alone? Life settled into a new, agonizing rhythm. There was my life with Clara, a world of quiet suffering, hushed whispers, and the ever-present shadow of death. And then there was my secret life, the one I lived inside my own head, where I was a detective, piecing together a crime that was being committed against my heart. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was piling up, creating a mountain of dread. The phone calls continued to dwindle, both in frequency and duration. Robert's excuses became more elaborate, more theatrical. There were last-minute investor dinners he couldn't possibly miss, transatlantic conference calls at odd hours, grueling all-day travel between cities. He was always rushing, always on his way somewhere else. The loving, detailed inquiries about his mother were replaced with rapid-fire questions that felt like an afterthought. I could picture him, phone pressed to his ear, waving impatiently at a waiter for the bill, eager to get back to something else, to someone else. Then the financial discrepancies began. I've always been the one who managed our household budget. It wasn't that Robert was careless with money. He just never had the patience for it. He'd sign the checks, but I balanced the books. He trusted me completely. Or so I thought. When the first joint credit card statement arrived after he'd been gone for nearly 3 months, my hand trembled as I slid open the envelope. I told myself I was just checking for his travel expenses, making sure everything was in order. But that was a lie. I was searching for proof. And I found it. There were the expected charges, airline tickets, hotel bills from cities I'd mentioned, Berlin, Vienna. But nestled among them were charges that made my heart stop. A charge from a high-end lingerie boutique in Paris. Was that a gift for me, for when he returned? I tried to convince myself. But it was followed by another charge that shattered that fragile hope. A dinner for 2 at a restaurant called Les Ciels de Paris, an intimate, notoriously romantic spot. The bill was exorbitant, far more than a solo diner would ever spend. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I had to sit down, right there on the floor of our study. My mind raced, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he was entertaining a client? A female client? But then I saw more. 2 tickets to an opera in Vienna. A charge from a jewelry store in Rome. Not a famous brand, but a small, exclusive artisan shop known for bespoke pieces. His words echoed in my head. I'm working myself to the bone. I was suffocating. I felt a desperate primal need to talk to him, to confront him. I waited until the time was right, when it would be evening for him in Italy. I sat by the phone for an hour, rehearsing my words, trying to sound calm and rational, not like the hysterical wife he always accused me of being. When I finally dialed the number of his hotel, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. A woman answered. Her voice was young, with a slight American accent. Pronto, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I was so stunned, I couldn't speak. I had expected the hotel operator. Hello? She said again, a hint of impatience in her tone. I found my voice, a weak, reedy thing. I'm calling for Robert Vance. Is he there? There was a muffled sound, as if she were covering the receiver with her hand. I could hear her faint, indecipherable words, followed by the deeper timbre of Robert's voice. Then he came on the line. Hello? He barked, his voice tight with irritation. Robert, it's me, I whispered. A heavy silence. Then, Eleanor, why are you calling me at the hotel? I told you I'd call you. Neertons? Who was that? I asked, my voice shaking. Who answered the phone? That was the front desk, he lied. But it was a clumsy, desperate lie. They must have patched you through directly. Look, I can't talk right now. I'm in the middle of a meeting. A meeting? In your hotel room? At 10 o'clock at night? The short, punchy sentences just fell out of me. The tension was unbearable. Yes, Eleanor. A meeting, he hissed, his voice a furious whisper. This is how business is done here. Not everything revolves around your schedule. You have no idea what I'm sacrificing, the pressure I'm under. And I don't need you checking up on me like a child. And then, the most cutting line of all. The one that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. To be honest, your paranoia is the last thing I need right now. It's making this whole unbearable situation 1,000 times worse. Just take care of my mother. That's all I ask. Can you at least do that? The line went dead. He had hung up on me. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. A strange, chilling numbness spread through me. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It wasn't just suspicion. It was a certainty. A cold, hard, and undeniable certainty. He wasn't alone. He had been lying to me for months. His great sacrifice was a grand vacation. His work was a woman. His devotion was a facade. And the worst part? The humiliation. He had turned my act of love, caring for his dying mother, into a mere transaction. Just take care of my mother. That's all I ask. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't his loving wife. I was the staff. The hired help, paid for with the lie of his love, left behind to handle the messy, inconvenient business of death while he lived his real life, his new life somewhere else. From that day on, I stopped trying. I stopped asking questions. I became an actress in my own home. I'd read his cheerful hollow postcards to Clara, my voice never wavering. I'd recount his fabricated work triumphs, tales of meetings and presentations that I now knew were a complete fiction. I lived a double life. The serene, capable caregiver in Clara's room, and the silent, shattered woman everywhere else. I stopped crying. My pain went somewhere deeper, a place beyond tears. It settled into a cold, hard knot of rage in the pit of my stomach. Every time I had to change Clara's sheets, every time I had to clean her, every time I had to watch her dignity slip away, piece by painful piece, I would think of him. I would think of him laughing in a romantic restaurant in Paris. I would think of him buying jewelry in Rome. I would think of the silky voice of the woman who answered his hotel phone. And my rage grew. It was a quiet, slow-burning fire. I tended to it in the dead of night, while Clara slept and the house was still. The woman who had been so desperate for his love was gone. The woman who had made excuses for him was gone. In her place, a different woman was starting to form. A woman who was beginning to understand that her love, her loyalty, and her sacrifice had been utterly and completely squandered. And that realization was leading me, day by day, closer to a breaking point. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the Eleanor who had stood weeping at the airport, waving goodbye, would not be the same Eleanor who would be there to say hello when he finally decided to come home. The end of my old life and the beginning of my new one arrived on a gray, drizzly Tuesday in late autumn. The fall air had a bite to it, and the world outside the window seemed to be weeping. It had been nearly 7 months since Robert left. 7 months of lies, postcards, and pain. Clara was fading. There's no other word for it. She was like a photograph left in the sun, the vibrant colors of her spirit leaching out day by day. She slept most of the time, her body conserving its last precious sparks of energy. But on this particular afternoon she was awake, and she was lucid. Her eyes, though sunken, were clear. She looked at me, a flicker of her old warmth returning. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice like dry paper. Could you bring me the big brown album? The one from your wedding, Kai?" My heart constricted. The wedding album. A book full of ghosts. A testament to a life I now knew was a lie. "Of course, Clara," I said, my voice gentle, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I retrieved it from the top of the wardrobe, its leather cover cool beneath my fingers. I sat on the edge of her bed and opened it across her frail legs. The first page was a picture of Robert and me, walking out of the church, showered in rice and confetti. We were so young. His smile was so real. My joy was so pure. It was a physical blow to see it, to remember the woman I was, so full of hope and trust. "He was so handsome, my Robbie," Clara murmured, tracing his face with a trembling finger. "And you, my dear, you were radiant. You made him so happy." A bitter venom rose in my throat, and I had to swallow it down. I turned the page. Us cutting the cake. Our first dance. Robert, with his arm around my waist, whispering something in my ear that had made me throw my head back and laugh. I stared at the photo, at that laughing girl, and I felt nothing but a profound and distant pity for her. As we were turning another page, the doorbell rang. Its chime felt jarring, an intrusion from the outside world into our little cocoon of memory and sorrow. I tucked the blanket around Clara's shoulders. "I'll be right back," I said. At the front door was the postman, holding a small, padded mailer. It wasn't a postcard. It had no return address, only a series of European stamps. My name and address were typed, not handwritten. A cold premonition washed over me. I took it inside, my hands unsteady. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the hall table and went back to Clara, forcing a smile onto my face. We looked at a few more pages, but the spell was broken. She was tired again, and her eyes soon drifted shut. Once she was asleep, I went back to the package. I stood in the silent hallway, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside, there was no letter. No note. Just a single photograph. A 4x6 color print. It was Robert. He was standing on a balcony, a brilliant blue sea sparkling behind him. He was tan, healthy, and smiling. Gosh, what a smile! It wasn't the tired, stressed smile of a man burdened by work. It was a genuine, relaxed, utterly joyful smile, the kind I hadn't seen in years. His arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of a woman. She was young, maybe 30 years younger than me, with long, blonde hair and a confident, proprietary look on her face. She was wearing a white sundress and a delicate gold necklace, the kind of piece I imagined one might buy from a bespoke jewelry shop in Rome. They weren't just standing together. They were pressed into each other, their bodies aligned, their heads tilted together. They looked like a couple. They looked happy. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered. It atomized. It turned to dust and blew away on a cold internal wind. All the denial, all the hope, all the carefully constructed excuses I had built to protect my own heart were obliterated by that one glossy image. The shame, the humiliation, the months of being his fool, his servant, his alibi, it all coalesced into a single blinding point of clarity. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My grief and my rage had burned themselves out, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. I looked from the photo in my hand to the wedding album still lying open in the living room. The laughing girl in the album was dead. The man she had loved never truly existed. He was a story I had told myself. And this woman, this Eleanor standing in the hallway frozen in her own life, knew she couldn't go on like this anymore. The performance was over. A strange calm descended upon me. It was the calm of absolute certainty. I knew with every fiber of my being what I had to do. My first act was not one of passion, but of precision. I walked into the study, the photograph still clutched in my hand. I sat down at the desk where I managed our finances, our life. I picked up the phone and made my first call. "Hello," I said, my voice even and clear. "I need to make an appointment with a divorce lawyer." "Yes, as soon as possible." "Make you sound." The second call was to our bank. I was a joint owner on all our accounts. With a few calm, authoritative sentences, I had all automatic transfers to Robert's personal credit card frozen. I arranged for the majority of our shared savings, the money I had carefully managed and grown for decades, to be moved into a new account under my name only. I left just enough in the joint account to avoid immediate suspicion, but the well was, for all intents and purposes, dry. His words echoed in my mind. "The money from this will secure our future." My future? I thought, not yours. But my greatest act of retaliation, my true fight back, was for the house. Our home, the beautiful prison he had designed. His monument to a perfect life. I looked around at the walls that had absorbed my tears, at the rooms that had become my cage. It was his masterpiece, the symbol of everything he was supposedly working for. And I decided, in that moment, to take it from him. I called the best real estate agent in Maple Creek, a woman I knew from the hospital auxiliary. "Martha," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "It's Eleanor Vance. I need to sell my house." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Eleanor? Sell the house? But why? Is everything all right?" No, breathe into." Everything is finally becoming all right, I said. I want to do it quietly, a private sale. I don't want a sign on the lawn. I want it sold, and I want it sold before Christmas. I knew he wouldn't be home before then. The latest postcard, from Greece this time, had said his work would now keep him away through the holidays. Another lie, but one I could now use against him. I moved through the next few weeks like a general executing a silent coup. By day, I was the same devoted Eleanor, tending to Clara, holding her hand, and lying to her sweet, trusting face about her wonderful son who was working so hard for her. I would read his stupid, cheerful postcards to her, my heart a block of ice. The pain of the deception was still there, but it now served my new purpose. It was fuel. But when Clara slept, I was a woman dismantling a life. I met with the lawyer. I signed papers. I showed the house to a young family who fell in love with it instantly. I sorted through 60 years of shared memories, boxing up my own life and purging his. Every object I touched was a ghost. The chair he sat in, the books he read. I removed them all, with a cold, methodical precision. I was erasing him, not just from my future but from my past. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a fool. I was a woman who had been pushed past the breaking point and had found solid ground on the other side. A ground forged from my own strength and my own pain. He had left me to handle a death, and in a way, I was. I was presiding over the death of our marriage, the death of the man I thought he was, and the death of the woman I used to be. And in her place, someone new, someone stronger, was finally being born. He had no idea what was waiting for him. He thought he would come home to his sanctuary, to his doting wife and his perfect life. He was about to find out he had no home to come back to. The first snow of the season was falling, the day Clara passed away. It was peaceful. Her final weeks were a gentle descent, a gradual letting go. I sat by her side, holding her hand, just as I had for months. The last postcard had arrived a few days earlier, from somewhere sunny and warm. I hadn't even bothered to see where. I didn't read it to her. There was no need for lies anymore. Instead, I read her a poem she loved, about an English garden in the spring. Her breathing slowed, and in the quiet of the afternoon, with the snow blanketing the world outside in silence, she was gone. I felt a profound wave of grief, but it was a clean grief. It was for her, for the kind, wonderful woman who had shown me so much love. It wasn't tangled up in my own heartbreak anymore. I had mourned the loss of my marriage already. This was different. This was goodbye to a friend. I made the necessary calls. I spoke to the funeral home. I spoke to my children, Michael and Sarah, who were devastated. And then, I made one final call to Robert's lawyer, informing him of his mother's passing. I did not call my husband. He was no longer my husband in my heart, and soon, he wouldn't be in the eyes of the law either. The sale of the house closed 2 days after Clara's funeral. The young family who bought it were so full of hope and excitement. As I handed the young woman the keys, the same keys I had held for 40 years, I didn't feel a single pang of sadness. I felt light. That beautiful house wasn't a home anymore. It had become a mausoleum, a monument to a lie. Handing over the keys felt like setting a bird free from a cage. And I was the bird. I moved into a small, lovely 2-bedroom apartment across town. It was bright and airy, with a big window in the living room that looked out over a park. The children were confused, of course. They thought my grief was making me act irrationally. "Mom, why are you doing this so fast? Dad is going to be heartbroken," Sarah had said, her eyes full of worry. I simply told them, "Your father and I need to make some changes. We'll talk about it when he gets back." And then, he came back. It was the week before Christmas. I didn't know the exact day he was arriving, and I didn't care. The outcome I had so meticulously planned unfolded exactly as I knew it would. I found out later, from my son Michael, what had happened. Robert had taken a taxi from the airport, full of bags, no doubt expecting to walk into his perfect home, to a grieving but dutiful wife, ready to forgive all for the sake of his sacrifice. But the taxi pulled up to a house with a giant red bow on the front door and a snowman on the lawn that he didn't recognize. He saw a child's bicycle in the driveway. He must have been so confused. He walked up the path and tried his key in the lock. It didn't fit. As he stood there, bewildered, the door opened. It was the new owner, the young husband, who looked at him and asked, "Can I help you?" The humiliation must have been crushing. The public, undeniable proof that he had been erased. He stammered something about a mistake, backed away, and fled. He called my old number. It was disconnected. He called my children, frantic, angry, confused. "What is going on? Where is your mother? What happened to the house?" Michael, bless his heart, simply gave him the name and address of my lawyer. Robert stormed into that lawyer's office the next day, and there, waiting for him, was a neat little package. It contained the final, signed divorce papers, a detailed summary of the division of assets, and a cashier's check for his exact legal share of the sale of the house, a house whose value had been diminished by the debts he'd secretly accrued. It also contained one other item, the 4x6 photograph of him and his mistress, which had been sent to me. On the back, I had written just 5 words. I hope she was worth it. The consequences for him were swift and absolute. His mistress, who had been enjoying the lavish lifestyle of a successful architect's partner, saw the final bank statement. She saw his true financial situation, now that I was no longer managing it. And she left him within a month. He had lost his mother, his wife, his home, his reputation, and his fortune, all in one fell swoop. He tried to fight the divorce settlement, but he had no grounds. I had done everything by the book. He had abandoned his family. He had committed adultery. He had no leg to stand on. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, and I had simply kicked it out from under him. And what did I find? Peace. A deep, quiet, unshakable peace. The first morning I woke up in my own apartment, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the park. There were no schedules, no lies to tell, no phantom perfume to haunt my hallways. There was just silence, a beautiful, liberating silence. I learned that my worth was never something Robert gave me. I had had it all along. I had just been taught to look for its reflection in his eyes. The greatest lesson I learned is that betrayal doesn't stain you. It reveals the person who betrayed you. Their cruelty is not a measure of your worthlessness, but of their own. So now I talk directly to you, to anyone listening who might feel invisible in their own life. If you are pouring all of your love, your energy, and your spirit into a person or a situation that only takes and never gives back, if you feel your own light dimming to keep someone else bright, please listen to this old woman. You cannot force a flower to grow in poisoned soil. Sometimes, the bravest and most loving thing you can possibly do is for yourself. It's to pack up your seeds, find new ground, and let yourself bloom. The silence after the storm is the most beautiful sound in the world. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for giving me the space to finally set it free. If my story touched you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next time together. And please, share your own story in the comments below. Reading them reminds all of us that we are never truly alone. Love you all. This is Grandma Eleanor, and I'll see you in the next story.